Good night, good night, everybody. Good night, gentle people. Oh my. I wanted to go out to go trick or treating, but it's raining. It's 30 degrees. And I said, oh no, not at all. Let me stay right here. Not going out in that cold for nothing. Not me. So I said, well, while I'm here, I'm not going to be going out to do what I usually do on a Halloween night. I may as well just read because it's the weather for reading. It's cold. It's the weather to stay in bed. So, hey, why not? So, come along with me, guys. We are going to be reading from the book, The Guardian. I noticed that this morning I did that reading, and I think maybe only four people went to listen to it. So, those who didn't listen are going to be missing out on a lot of the details of the story. But anywho, we are hoping to finish reading, to be finished with the reading of this book by the end of this week. We are close to the end, actually, just having a few more chapters to go. So come on with me, guys. I will lay in the darkness. Woo! And it is cold. Let us read chapter 35 of the book, The Guardian. Now, if you have been following the reading, you know that Julie is having a really hard time. She has started dating Mike, who was her dead husband's best friend, and their relationship is going well. However, in the reading this morning, she had not told him that the other guy, Richard, who was trying to date her, had slept over her house one night. And now, when he found out, he was rather angry, as is expected. So he stormed out, left the house. But Richard is constantly stalking Julie, and Julie is terrified about staying by herself because she's scared Richard is going to break into her house and, do the worst. So she is terribly afraid of him. And he is constantly stalking her, watching her with binoculars and all. And now, one of the ladies with whom Julie works in the beauty salon started dating Richard, and now they have found her body on the side of the road. Well, she's not dead, she's in a coma, but they found her on the side of the road. And so the story has taken a dark turn. Julie and Mike are gone to the beach house to spend the weekend. Julie and Mike are gone to the beach house to spend the weekend, and Richard is currently on the run because the officers had gone to see him, but he took off. So he's on the run. There's a bolo out for him for the attempted murder of Andrea. So we're going to continue reading and see if they found him, or did he find Julie and Mike, or what happened. We want to know. I'm super curious. So come with me and let us read here, guys. Chapter 35. Within 40 minutes, Richard Franklin's home was crowded with Swansboro police officers and Onslow County sheriffs. The forensics team from Jacksonville was inside collecting fingerprints and looking for evidence of Andrea's presence. Jennifer and Pete were standing outside the house with their captain, Russell Morrison, a gruff bulldozer of a man with thinning gray hair and eyes set too close together. He had them repeat their story twice, then listened as Jennifer filled him in on what she had already learned. When she finished, Morrison just kept shaking his head. He had been born and raised in Swansboro and regarded himself as its protector. The night before, he had been one of the first to arrive at the scene where Andrea had been found, even though he had been sound asleep when he had received the call at home. This is the same guy that Mike Harris assaulted at the bar? The one she claimed was stalking her? Yes, Jennifer said. But you don't have any concrete evidence linking him to the crime. Not yet. Have you walked to Andrea's neighbors to see if they have seen him around? No. He came here right after the salon. Russell Morrison considered what he had been told. Just because he ran doesn't mean he's the one who assaulted Andrea. Neither does anything you have learned about him. But Morrison held up his hands to cut her off. I'm not saying I think he's innocent. Hell, he tried to kill an officer, and that doesn't happen on my watch. He glanced at Pete. You sure you're okay? Yeah. Stop, but I'm okay. Good. You are the lead on this investigation, but I'm going to put everyone on it. Pete nodded as they were interrupted by a shout from Fred Boris, one of the officers who had been in the house. He was approaching them rapidly. Ethan! Ethan! He called. Morrison turned towards him. Yeah? I think we have found something, he announced. What is it? Blood! Blood! He said. Henry's beach house was on Topsail Island, a slit of land half a mile offshore, about 40 minutes from Swansboro. Covered by rolling dunes speckled with sawgrass and white sand, the island was popular with families during the summer, though few people lived there year-round. During spring, visitors seemed to have the island all to themselves. Like all homes there, the main floor of the home had been built above the garage and storage areas due to storm surges. Steps led from the back porch to the beach, and the windows along the back of the house offered an unobstructed view of the waves as they rolled in. Julie stood at the window, staring at their ceaseless motion. Even here, it was impossible for her to relax or feel safe. She and Mike had stopped at the grocery store along the way, buying enough food to last them a week. Then they swung by Walmart to grab enough basic clothing to get them through the next few days. Neither of them had any idea how long they would be there, and she didn't want to go out in public unless she really had to. The drapes were drawn on every window but this one. Mike had parked Emma's car in the garage so it couldn't be seen from the road. As they were driving, he had taken Enrid's advice and exited the highway 3 times, circling through neighborhood streets, constantly checking the rearview mirror. No one had followed them. They were sure of that. Still, Julie couldn't shake the feeling that Richard could somehow find her. Behind her, Mike was putting the groceries away, and Julie could hear the sound of cabinets as they were opened and closed. Maybe they have already caught him, Mike offered. Julie said nothing. Singer moved beside her and nuzzled her hip. Julie's hand went automatically to his head. Are you okay? No, she said. Not really. Mike nodded. Stupid question, ain't it? I hope Andrea's okay, he said. When she hadn't responded, Mike looked up. We are safe here, he said. You know that, right? There's no way he could know we are here. OMG. I know, but she wasn't so sure, and her fear was so strong that she found herself instinctively backing away from the window. At her movement, Singer's ears rose to attention. What is it? Mike asked. Julie shook her head. On the beach, she could see two couples walking near the water's edge, headed to opposite directions. Both had walked by the house without a glance only minutes before. There was one else. There was no one else out there. Nothing, she finally said. It's a beautiful view, isn't it? Julie lowered her gaze. To be honest, she hadn't noticed. Morrison huddled the officers outside Richard's house as he took charge, outlining what was happening and what he wanted done. Jacksonville Police and the Sheriff's Department are looking for the coroner to see if we can find this guy, he said. But in the meantime, this is what I need you to do. He pointed from one man to the next as he spoke. Harrelson and Tita, I need you to head down to the bridge and talk to anyone on the crew who might know some of this guy's hangouts, where he goes, who his friends are, what he likes to do. Thomas, I need you to stay here while forensic gathers the evidence. Make sure they tag and bag everything. This one has to be by the books. Boris, I want you to go to Andrea's apartment and talk to the neighbors. I want to know if anyone else has seen this guy at her place. Johnson, likewise for you. I need you to lead. I need you to head to Morehead City to find out if anyone else can verify that Andrea and Richard Franklin were together. Fuck. I need fuck. I need you to find out who else Andrea has been seeing. Who might have done this? It's probable that we have the guy already, but you know how defense attorneys are. We have to look into every possible suspect. He turned to Jennifer and Pete. And you two, I want you to find out everything we can about this guy. I mean, everything. And see what you can learn about Jessica too. I want to talk to her if we can. What about the subpoena for J.D. Blanchard? Jennifer asked. Morrison met her eyes. Let me handle that. I don't know why to me the music sounds loud. Like Julie and Mike, Richard Franklin stopped at the store. After pulling his car into the rear corner parking lot of the hospital, where it wouldn't draw attention by remaining parked in the same spot for a few days, he grabbed the bags from the store and walked down the block before heading into a gas station restroom. He locked the door behind him. Staring into the grimy mirror above the sink, he became his methodical self again. In the plastic bags were items necessary for a change he had gone through once before: a razor, scissors, hair coloring, tanning cream, and a pair of inexpensive reading glasses. Hmm, not much, but enough to alter his appearance from a distance, enough to hide in plain view for the short time, enough to find her. There was, however, the problem of where she had gone. And she was gone. Of that he was now certain. No one had answered the phone at the salon, and when he had called the garage, one of Henry's flunkies had said that Mike had left as well. So she had run, but where? Richard smiled, knowing he'd have the answer soon. Even when people tried to be careful, they made mistakes. And her mistake, he was certain, came down to this. Someone knew exactly where she was. Jesus is manipulative. Henry and Emma, or maybe probably knew, and the police would know as well. They'd want to talk to her, to tell her what they had learned, to keep their eye on her. One of these people, he was certain, would lead him to her doorsteps. He whistled softly under his breath as he began to alter his appearance. 30 minutes later, he emerged into the sunlight, blonder, tanner, wearing glasses, and without a mustache. A new man. All that's left is to find another car, he thought. He headed down the street towards the mall across from the hospital. Back at the station, Jennifer's first call was to the Denver police station, where she was passed from person to person until finally reaching Detective Cohen. She told him who she was and about the investigation. As she spoke, she heard the detective whistle under his breath. Yeah, he said. I'll see what I can do. I'm not at my desk right now, so let me call you back in a few minutes. After hanging up, she glanced at Pete. He was on the phone to various airlines in the Jacksonville, Raleigh, and Wilmington areas, trying to find out if Richard had indeed traveled out of town when he had told Julie he was at his mother's funeral. If so, they wanted to know where he had gone, in the hopes it would lead them to someone who could tell them about him. Morrison was in his office, serving as the hub as information came in from the other offices. Thomas had called a few minutes earlier. He had said that the forensics team had found evidence of semen stains on the sheets, and they were scouring the bed for additional evidence. When Cohen called back, Jennifer picked up the first ring. We have got information on a few Richard Franklins, he said. It's not an unusual name, you know. So more than one popped up in the system. Tell me about him. Jennifer gave him a brief description: height and weight, hair color and eyes, approximate age and race. Okay, give me a few seconds. On the phone, she could hear him tapping information into the computer. Oh, he finally said. What? He hesitated. I don't think we have any information for you. Nothing, not even an arrest. Not based on what you told me. We have records on 7 individuals with the name Richard Franklin. 4 of those are African Americans. 1 is deceased, and 1 is in his 60s. What about the last one? A typical druggie. He's about the same age as your guy. But nothing else about him matches up. There's not a chance he could pass for an engineer, even for a day. He's been in and out of prison for the last 20 years, and from our records, he never lived at the addresses you listed. Is there anything else? Can you track county records, or maybe records from other cities? It's all in here, my love, Cohen said, sounding as disappointed as she did. The system was just updated a couple of years ago. We have information on anyone arrested in the date going back to 1977. If he had been arrested anywhere in the state of Colorado, we'd know it. Jennifer tapped her finger on the pad. Could you fax me a photograph of the last guy anyway? Or attach it to an email? Sure, but I don't think he's your guy, Owen said, his tone dropping slightly. He paused. Look, if you need anything else, please let me know. Sounds like a pretty good guy, he said. Not the kind we want walking around in public. After hanging up the phone, Jennifer placed a call to the Columbus Police Department, hoping for better luck. Mabel had left the salon that morning and driven to the hospital. Now she was sitting beside Andrea in the intensive care unit, holding her hand and hoping that Andrea would somehow know she was there. You're going to be okay, sweetheart, she whispered, almost to herself. Your mom and dad are going to be here soon. The heart monitor beeped steadily in response, and Mabel eyed the phone. She wished she knew what was going on with the investigation. For a moment, she considered calling Pete Gandy to find out, But she was still so mad at him for letting this go on as long as it had that she didn't think she could do so without screaming at him. Mike had been there. All he had had to do was listen to Julie, and none of this would have happened. Why had that not been done? Why had it been so hard? How on earth had he ever passed training? Mabel heard the sound of footsteps approaching and looked up to see the nurse. She had been checking in every 20 minutes to monitor any changes. The first 24 hours was critical. The doctor had said if Andrea was going to come out of a coma without brain damage, more than likely she'd show some improvement by then. Mabel's throat tightened as she watched the nurse in action, checking vital signs and scribbling notes. By the look on her face, Mabel knew there was no chance at all for Andrea. Jennifer hung up with the Columbus Police Department just as Morrison came out of his office. Got the subpoena? He said. Judge Riley signed it a few minutes ago, and it's being faxed to J.G. Blanchard right now. We should have the information shortly, unless they get their legal team involved and try to stall things. Jennifer nodded but was unable to hide the information in her expression. Still no luck? Morrison asked. She shook her head. Nothing. Not a damn thing. He hasn't so much as had a speeding ticket in either Colorado or Ohio. No arrest. No record of him even being a suspect in a crime. The facts from Denver didn't help. Not our guy. Not even close. She scanned the fax photographs anyway. I don't understand it. A guy like this doesn't just appear out of nowhere. I know he's done this type of thing before. There's got to be some record of it. She ran a hand through her hair. Any news from the house? It seems as if he did some cleaning recently. They were able to bag a few things, but we would know for sure if any of it's of any use. We won't know until it is examined. Right now, we have someone running a blood sample down in Wilmington. The department there has one of the best labs in the state, and as soon as they get both samples, they'll run a comparison with Andrea's blood from the hospital. It's number one on the priority list, and hopefully we'll get a match. Blood type checks out. Blood type checks out though. Andrea is A positive, and so was the sample. It's not as common as O, as it seems likely that he's our guy. Anything from Moorhead? Or the workers at the site? Not so far. Not so far. Franklin seemed to keep to himself. Harrelson and Tita couldn't find anyone who liked the guy, let alone hung out with him. Nobody even knew where he lived. They have still got a few more people to talk to, but they are not very hopeful. As the Boris and Puck, they say that no one can remember seeing Franklin anywhere near Andrea's apartment, but they are getting information on other possible suspects just in case. She tended to associate. She tended to associate with some pretty rough guys, and Puck is gathering their names now. Richard Franklin's our guy, Jennifer reiterated. He is. Richard Franklin is our guy. Morrison held up his hands as if he realized that. We'll know that for sure in a couple of hours, he said. As for Moorhead City, Johnson is showing Andrea's picture around. Good idea to grab that photo, by the way. But so far, nothing. There are a lot of bars and restaurants to cover, and they just got there a little while ago. Evening shifts in the bars and restaurants started about 5, so it might take a while. Jennifer nodded. Morrison nodded toward the phone. Have you been able to track down any information on Jessica yet? No. she said. Not yet. That's my next step. Julie sat on the couch with Singer by her side, one car, one ear cocked forward. Mike turned on the television and surfed through the channels, then turned it off. He wandered through the house, making sure the front door was locked, then looked through the window up and down the street. Quiet, completely quiet. I think I'll give Henry a call, he finally said, just to let him know we made it. Julie nodded. Pulling back her hair with both hands, Jennifer turned her attention to the photographs that had been in Richard's briefcase. Unlike Julie, Jessica appeared to have posed happily for most of them. It also seemed likely that she was indeed his wife. Jennifer noted that in a few pictures there was an engagement ring, which was later joined by a wedding band. Unfortunately, the photographs couldn't tell her anything about Jessica herself, if indeed that was her name. None had information written on the back that might reveal a maiden name or even where they were taken. The photographs themselves showed no landmarks, and after a cursory glance through them, Jennifer wondered how to find out more about her. She searched the internet for any mention of Jessica Franklin, looking for the obvious. Anyone from Colorado or Ohio, for instance, and checked out the sites that posted a photograph. There were less than a handful of those, and none matched the woman she was looking for. It didn't surprise her. After a divorce, most women would go back to their maiden names. But what if they hadn't divorced? He had already demonstrated how violent he could be. Jennifer looked at the phone. After hesitating for just a moment, she dialed Detective Cohen in Denver. No, no, no problem, he said in response to her request. Since you called, I've been thinking about that guy. For some reason, his name sounds familiar. This shouldn't be too hard to find out, so let me check. She waited as he checked the records. No, he finally said. No murder victims listed under the name of Jessica Franklin. No missing persons either. Is there any way you could find out anything about their marriage? When it took place? How long they had been married? We don't have that kind of information on hand, but the county might. Your best bet is to look through property tax records, since most homes are owned in both names. And that might help you get started. But you'll need to find someone who can who can access the archives. And that's of course assuming they were married in the area. Oh my God. Albert, ¿cómo está? How you doing? Good to see you, Albert. Do you have the number? Not offhand, but let me look it up. She heard him pull open a drawer, cursed, then called to one of his colleagues for a book. A moment later, he recited the number, and Jennifer was jotting it down as Pete came rushing to her desk. Daytona! Daytona! He said. That son of a bitch went to Daytona when he said he went to his mother's funeral. Daytona? Isn't that where Julie is from? I don't remember, Pete said quickly. But listen, if his mother died, we might be able to find some information about her in the recent obituary. I've already accessed the newspaper, and it's printing up the information now. Pretty smart, huh? Jennifer said nothing as she thought about it. Don't you think that's odd? She asked. I mean, his mother dying in the same place Julie grew up. Maybe they grew up together. Possibly, but unlikely, she thought, shaking her head. It just didn't sound right, especially considering that there was proof he had been in Denver 4 years ago And Julie certainly could have mentioned any access, could have mentioned any common history they shared. But why would he go to Daytona? Suddenly she paled. Do you have a phone number for Julie's mother? She asked. He shook his head. No. Get it. I think we should talk to her. But what about the obituaries? Forget them. We are not even sure if the story about his mother is true. Let's get his phone records instead. Maybe we can find out who he really is. I should have done that from the beginning. She realized suddenly. So so much for thinking she knew everything. Phone records? From the house? Pete, get the phone records for Rachel, will you? Hey guys, how is everybody doing? Good to see you all, guys. I don't know about you, but I'm anxious to finish reading this book because I want to know what has happened. And this book is so well written that I can't I can't put it down, but I promise I didn't read ahead this morning. I probably should have, but I didn't. Let us continue. Forget them. We are not even sure if the story about his mother is true. Let's get his phone records instead. Maybe we can find out who he called. I should have done that from the beginning. She realized suddenly. So much for thinking she knows everything. Phone records? From the house, Pete. From the house. Get the phone records for Richard Franklin. Pete blinked, trying to keep up. So the obituaries don't mean anything? No, he didn't go down there to see his mother. He went down there to learn about Julie. I'll bet my life on it. Henry sat with Emma at the kitchen table, his eyes absently following a fly that was bouncing against the glass. So they are sure no one followed them? Henry nodded. That's what Mike said when he called. And do you think they're safe? I hope so. But until they catch the son of a bitch, I won't rest easy. What if they don't? They'll find him. Believe me, they will. But what if they don't? Emma asked again. How long are they how long are they going to have to hide there? Henry shook his head. As long as it takes. He paused. But I should probably call and let the police know where they are. Oh my God, don't do that, Henry. Jennifer absently twirled a strand of her hair as she finished up her conversation with Henry. Thanks for letting me know, she said. I appreciate it. Goodbye. So they have left town, she thought, hanging up. On the one hand, she probably would have done the same thing if she had been in their situation. On the other hand, they were farther away if if they needed help. Though Topsail was still in the country, it was at the southern end, at least 40 minutes from Swansboro. The archived tax records had been a dead end. The house had been listed in Richard Franklin's name only. Without any place else to turn for information, Jennifer returned her focus to the photographs. Photographs she knew could tell her about not only the subject, but the photographer as well. And Richard had been quite good. Many of the images were striking, and she found herself staring at them. Richard Franklin, she decided, wasn't simply a weekend photographer, but someone who viewed photography as an art. It made sense, considering the equipment they had found in his house. It wasn't something she was focused on right away, but could that knowledge be helpful? And if so, how? She wasn't sure yet. Still, the longer she looked, the more she felt that she was on the right track with this line of thinking. Though she wasn't sure exactly what the answers were yet, or even the questions for that matter, as she stared at the photographs and wondered what they implied about Richard. She couldn't help but feel that she was getting close to something important. Andrea, what's up? Andrea, me decide to read the book, to read the book tonight, you know. And that me did I go do, but me decide to read the book tonight. I was gonna go out to the Halloween, you know, go get some Starburst and some Kit Kat and stuff. But yeah, but I am, man, 'cause rain is falling and it is cold. It is like, I don't know, maybe like, I think the last time I looked, it was like 30 degrees or something like that. There had been no sun today, just cold and rain. So I was like, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna go out just to go get some candy that's not even good for me anyway. Not gonna go out in this rain. Not at all. But anyway, let us continue. We are on to chapter 36. In Denver, Detective Larry Cohen thought about the phone calls. Officer Romanello had wanted information on Richard Franklin, and though he had searched the database without success, he knew he had heard the name before, and he had told Jennifer Romanello the name was familiar. Could have been anything, of course. A witness is one of the hundreds of cases he had been involved with. He may even have seen the name in the newspaper at one time or another. Might even have been a stranger he had bumped into at a party or someone he had met in passing. Yet, he had a feeling that the name had something to do with police business. If he hadn't been arrested, though, what was it? Rising from his desk, he decided to ask around. Maybe someone else in the department would be able to clear it up for him. An hour later, Morrison emerged from his office with both the phone records and the information from J.D. Blanchard that Richard Franklin had originally submitted. Included in the facts was his resume and information about the previous projects on which he had consulted. He took the phone records. Jennifer set the photographs aside and began studying the information from J.D. Blanchard. At the top of the resume, Richard had listed an apartment in Columbus as his address. But below that, however, was a gold mine. Whom he had worked for and when, association lists, previous experience, his educational background. Got you, he whispered. After calling information, After calling information, she dialed Lentry Construction in Cheyenne, Wyoming, the last company he had worked for before forming his own corporation. After identifying after identifying himself, After identifying himself to the receptionist, she was passed on to Clancy Edwards, the vice president, who had been with the company almost 20 years. Richard Franklin? Sure, I remember him. Edwards offered almost immediately. He was one hell of a manager here. Really knew his stuff. I wasn't surprised when he went into business for himself. When was the last time you talked to him? Oh, gee. Let me think about it. He moved to Denver, you know. I guess it must have been 8 or 9 years ago. We were work we were working on, let's see, that would have been in about 95, right? I think it was a project out in, excuse me, Mr. Richards, but do you know if he was married? It took a moment for Edwards to realize she had asked another question. Married? Yes, yes. Was he married? Edwards laughed under his breath. Not a chance. We were all pretty sure he was gay. Jennifer pushed the phone closer to her ear, wondering if she had heard him right. Wait, are you sure? Well, not 100%. Not that he ever said anything about it, of course. We didn't put it either. A man's personal business is his own as long as he can do the job. That's always been the way we work. We do a good job with affirmative action at our company. Always have. Jennifer barely listened as he went on. Wyoming's come a long way, but it's not San Francisco, if you know what I mean. And it wasn't always easy. But times are changing, even here. Did he get along with everyone? She suddenly asked, remembering what Jake Blanson had told her on the phone. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like I said, he really knows his stuff. And people respected him for it. And he was a nice guy too. Bought my wife a hat for her birthday. Not that she wears it much anymore. You know how women are. How about the construction workers? Did he get along with them? Caught in mid sentence, Clancy Edwards took another moment to catch up. Yeah, yeah, sure. Them too. Like I said, everyone liked him. A couple might have had a problem with him. Well, his personal life, but everyone got along with him just fine. We were all sorry to see him go. When Jennifer said nothing, Edward seems to feel the need to fill the silence. Can I ask what this is all about? He's not in trouble, is he? Nothing happened to him. Nothing happened to him, did it? Jennifer was still trying to make sense of this new information. It's regarding an investigation. I'm sorry, but I can't say anymore, she answered. Do you remember if you ever received a call from an outfit called JD Blanchard regarding a reference? I didn't, but I think the president did. We were happy to give a recommendation. Like I said, he did a real good job. Jennifer found her gaze drifting to the photographs of Jessica again. Do you know if he was onto photography as a hobby? Who, Richard? He might have been, but if he was, he never mentioned it to me. Why? No reason, she said, suddenly running out of questions. I want to thank you for your time, Mr. Edwards. If I need any more help, would you mind if I call you again? No, 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 not at all. You can reach me until 6 on most days. We have a lot of respect for law enforcement around here. My grandpa used to be the sheriff for, oh gee, I guess it must have been around 20 years or so. Even as he was speaking, Jennifer was hanging up the phone, shaking her head and wondering why none of what she had just heard seemed to make any sense. You were right, he said to Jennifer a few minutes later, looking confused that she had been right about her instincts, while his had been so off base. There was a number listing a private investigator in Daytona. He glanced at the note he had scribbled. Richard made 3 calls to an outfit called Crooms Investigations. No answer when I dialed it, but I left a message. Sounds, oops, sounds like a one-man shop. No secretary and a man's voice on the answering machine. How about Julie's mother? Pete shook his head. Yeah, I got her number through information, but there was no answer. I'll try again in a little while. How is it going on your end? Jennifer briefed him on her conversation with Clancy Edwards. When she finished, Pete scratched the back of his head. Gay, huh? He nodded as if it made sense. I can see that. Jennifer reached for the resume again, trying to ignore his comment. I'm going to try the next company on the list, she says. It's been a long time since he has worked there, but I'm hopeful that I can talk to someone who remembers him. After that, I guess I guess I guess I'll try the bank in Denver where he kept his accounts, or maybe I can get some information from some of his former neighbors. If I can locate any of them, that is. That sounds like it'll take a while. Jennifer nodded, distracted, still thinking about the call to Edwards. Listen, she said. scribbling down the basic information from the resume. While I'm doing that, see if you can find out anything about his childhood. It says he was born in Seattle, so call the major hospital and see if you can find the records of his birth certificate. Maybe we can find out more if we hunt down his family. I'll keep working on that end. Sure. Oh, and keep trying the detective and Julie's mother. I really want to talk to them. You got it. It took more it took more time than he had imagined it would to find a car, but Richard exited the parking lot of the mall in a green 1994 Pontiac. Eh, isn't that Mabel's car? Okay, let's continue. Trans AM. Turning into traffic, he headed for the highway. As far as he could tell, no one was watching him. It was ridiculous in this day and age, he thought, that people still left their keys in the ignition. Didn't they realize that someone would take advantage of their stupidity? No, of course not. Those things could never happen to them. It was a world of Pete Gandhis out there, blind and lazy morons who left us vulnerable to terrorists, not only with their stupidity, but with their lack of vigilance, their fat, their fat, contented ignorance. He would never be so careless, but he wasn't complaining. He needed a car, and this one would do just fine. The afternoon wore on. In the course of her calls, Jennifer had come across one dead end after another. Finding neighbors had been all but impossible. She had to convince a country worker to go through property tax records to find the owners, then find the names through information, all the while hoping they didn't move. And that took more time than she had thought it would. In the course of 4 hours, she talked to 4 people, all of whom had known Richard Franklin at one time. 2 were former neighbors, and 2 were managers who vaguely remembered Richard Franklin from the single year he had spent working for a company in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Like Edwards, all 4 had said essentially the same thing about Richard Franklin. He was a nice guy who got along with everybody, probably gay. If his hobby was photography, they didn't know about it. Jennifer stood from her desk and made her way across the station to get another cup of coffee. Who was this guy, she wondered, and why on earth did it feel as if everyone had been describing someone else entirely? Halfway across the country, Detective Larry Cohen discussed the situation with a few people in the department. Joseph, what's up? Elise, my love, how are you doing? Is it starting to get cold up there yet, Arliss? Boy, I think today it started to get really cold, and I don't want to turn on the heat. Because you have on the heat and then you have on all these clothes, and when you're under the sheets, you just start to feel hot. You gotta take it off. Yeah, so I just like to bundle up, bundle up, and lay under the blanket. Oh my God, and my vacation is up. Jesus God, what cruelty. But anywho, let us continue. I started talking and missed where I was. Oh, it's very cold up there for you. Oh my God. I was talking to my son in Toronto and he was all dressed up in. And I said, it's that cold up there? I was like, yes. Like, oh my God. And it is cold here, but the cold here usually starts around Thanksgiving. Yeah. Not Thanksgiving, like Halloween. And it really lived up to the expectations because it is It's been cold all day. It's been raining, cold, and yeah, all day. That's why I didn't go out to go get any candy. I'm just like, hey, there's no need for me to stress myself going out to look for candy. Like, yeah, in the rain, certainly not. Not going out in this rain. Hey, no. Hold on, let me see who sent me this. Okay. Let us continue reading, guys. Today was zero. Oh my God. Joseph said I'm at 43 right now. Let me see how the temperature outside right now. Because today was 30 something. Hold on. How the phone now tell me? Phone is supposed to tell me the weather. Let me see. Weather, temp, and wow, in Raleigh it's 46. Ooh, let me see what it is right here. Oh gosh, they say it's 45. They say it's 45 right now. That's what they say. Between 43 and 45. Between 42 and 45 right now. Okay. It is certainly cold. I opened the door and wow. Yeah. So let us continue, lovely people. We are going to continue. We're reading this book here, The Guardian. Wow, and I love the book. I love it. Nicholas Sparks did a great job writing this book. At his desk, Pete was having more luck. He had finished collecting the information on the early period of Richard's life, one of which was difficult to find. Feeling rather proud, he was heading over to fill Jennifer in when the phone rang. She held up a finger for Pete to wait until she was finished. Swansboro Police Department, Jennifer said. Officer Romanella speaking. She heard her throat clear on the other end. This is Detective Cohen from Denver. Jennifer sat up. Oh, hey, did you find anything? Sort of. After your call, I kept thinking how familiar the name Richard Franklin sounded. So I asked around the department before it finally hit me where I've heard it before. He paused. After that, one of the other detectives here told me something rather interesting. It concerned a case he investigated 4 years ago about a missing person. Jennifer reached for her pen. Jessica Franklin? He glanced at Jennifer when he heard Jessica's name. No, not about Jessica. Then who were you talking about? Richard Franklin, the guy you called me about. Jennifer paused. What are you trying to say? Richard Franklin, Detective Cohen said slowly. He's the missing person. But he's here. I understand that. But 4 years ago he vanished. He didn't show up to work one day, and after a week or so, his secretary finally contacted us. I talked to the detectives in charge of the investigation. From all appearances, he said it looked like the guy suddenly took off. Clothes were on the bed and the drawers looked rifled through. Two suitcases were missing. His secretary told us they were the ones he always used on business, and his car was gone as well. He had made a cash withdrawal from the ATM the last day that anyone saw him. He ran? It seems so. Why? That's what the detective couldn't figure out. From the interviews with Franklin's acquaintances, No one could figure it out. They said he wasn't the type who would simply take off and leave his business behind. No one could understand it. And there wasn't any legal trouble, none that the detective could find. There weren't any lawsuits pending. And as I told you before, he wasn't in any trouble with us. It's like he simply decided to start over. It was the same thought Jennifer had had when she had seen his credit report, she remembered. Why didn't his family report it? Well, that's the thing. There really wasn't any family to speak of. His father was deceased. He had no siblings, and his mother was in a nursing home and suffering from dementia. Jennifer considered the implications. Do you have any information you could send me on the case? Sure. I'm already pulling the files. I can FedEx it tomorrow after I make copies. Is there any way you could fax it over? It's a thick file, he said. It will take at least an hour to get it all to you. Please, she said. I'm probably going to be here all night anyway. Yeah, he said. I can do that. Give me your fax number again. Beyond the window above the kitchen table in Henry's beach house, the ocean was glowing orange as if a fire had been set beneath the surface. As the last traces of the day began to vanish, the kitchen slowly grew dimmer. The overhead light buzzed with a fluorescent hum. Mike moved closer to Julie as she watched Singer on the beach. He was lying on the sand, ears up, head swiveling occasionally from side to side. Are you ready to eat yet? He asked. I'm not hungry. Mike nodded. How's Singer doing? He's fine. No one's out there, you know, Mike said. Singer would let us know. Julie nodded, then leaned into Mike as he slipped his arms around her. Morrison left his office, striding towards Jennifer and Pete. It's Andrea Radley's blood all night. Andrea Radley's blood all right. Just got off the phone with the lab, and they confirmed it. No doubt about it. Jennifer barely heard him. Instead, she was staring at the first page that had come through the fax from Denver. And Johnson found a witness, Morrison went on. Turns out that one of the bartenders at Mosquito Grove remembered Andrea from the other night, gave a perfect description of Richard Franklin, said the guy was a real jerk. Jennifer was still staring at the first page from the fax, ignoring the other pages as they came through. He's not Richard Franklin, she said quietly. Morrison and Pete looked at her. What are you talking about? Morrison asked. The subject, she said quietly. His name isn't Richard Franklin. The real Richard Franklin has been missing for 3 years. Here she said, handing over the first page of the fax. It was a photograph of the missing person, and despite the haziness of the fax pictures, the bald head and heavy features made it clear to her that it wasn't the man they had been looking for. This just came in from Denver. This is the real Richard Franklin. Morrison and Pete looked at the picture. Pete blinked in confusion. This is Richard Franklin? He asked. Yes. Pete, con- Pete continued to stare at the picture, but they didn't look alike. Morrison met Jennifer's eyes. You are saying that this guy took over his identity? Jennifer nodded. Then who the hell are we looking for? Morrison asked. Jennifer glanced towards the windows at the far end of the department. I have no idea. Oh my God. I'm telling you, this guy is a real con artist. So I think he unalived that person named Richard Franklin and took over that person's identity. Oh, he's a real something, isn't he? Verse 37. Thoughts? Morrison said. An hour later, with most of the officers present, Morrison couldn't hide his anger and frustration. With Jennifer and Pete, he had scored the items retrieved from the he had scored the items retrieved from the house in the hope that they might yield the suspect's true identity. But they had turned up nothing. Neither had another examination of his phone records. What about fingerprints? They might help, Boris offered. We are checking for a match, but unless he had been arrested in North Carolina, it won't help. I've talked to the police chief in Colorado and he's agreed to push the data through, but there's no guarantee that the suspect had ever been in Denver. But he took over Richard Franklin's identity, Jennifer protested. There's no proof that he was the one responsible for the disappearance. For all we know, he stumbled across the information and took advantage of it. But Morrison raised his hands, just keeping just keeping our options open. I'm not saying he wasn't involved, but we know we have to consider everything. Besides, that's not the issue here. The issue is Andrea Radley, what he's done, and what he's capable of doing. What do we know for sure, Ramonello? You seem to have the best handle on him. Jennifer rattled off what she knew. He's educated, not likely a degree in engineer, most likely a degree in engineering. So that means he went to college. He likes photography and seems to have an eye for it, which means he has been doing it for some time. He had a wife named Jessica once, though we don't know anything about her. He's probably a sociopath. He has been stalking Julie since the beginning of their acquaintance and seems to confuse her with his wife. They look so much alike, and he's even called her by his wife's name. And because of the complexity of what he has pulled off over the past few years, I'm fairly certain he has been in trouble with the law before. I think he's probably on the run, which means he has had experience in hiding from the police. Morrison nodded. Pete, your take on this? Pete thought for a moment. He's stronger than he looks. He can bench almost as much as me. The other officers glanced at him. I saw him in the gym, he said defensively. Morrison shook his head and exhaled, as if wondering why he had bothered to ask. Okay, here's what we do. Boris, get down to Blanchard and see if they have any photographs of this guy. We don't have much time, but I want them on the evening news tonight. If possible, if possible, I'll call the station's manager and explain the situation. I also want this guy's picture in the paper. So let's get a reporter down here so we can control the information. I want the rest of you trying to figure out where this guy is. Call every hotel and motel in Swansboro and Jacksonville to see if anyone matching his description checked in today. I know he's a long shot, but we can't ignore the possibility that he's right under our noses. If anything comes up, I want you to go in pairs to check it out. And after that, I need all of you here tonight after the news shows. The calls, wi- the calls will come flooding in, and we'll need everyone available to answer them. The most important thing is to find out if they have seen him today, not yesterday, not last week. Then try to weed out this then try to weed out the crazies, and we'll see where we are. Morrison looked around. Everyone clear? There were murmurs of assent all around. Then let's go to do it. Winsome, Sister Angie, what's up? What's up? What's up? How's everybody doing? Knowing they would be searching for him in the Swansboro area, Richard had driven 2 hours northeast and checked into a rundown hotel right off the highway. the kind of place where the customers paid in cash and no identification was required to check in. Now he was lying in bed and staring at the ceiling. They can look, he thought, but they won't find me. He wondered if the police had learned that he wasn't he wondered if the police had learned that he wasn't really Richard Franklin. Even if they had, he knew it didn't matter. They couldn't connect him to Franklin's disappearance or learn his former identity. The hard part had been finding the right kind of man, a man without a family, even with the computers at the various libraries he had visited while on the run from the law, calling the professional associations. Winsome, what's up? Aurelis, how you doing? Good to see you. Calling the professional associations list by using the internet had been tedious and time consuming, but he had stayed at it, diligent in his pursuit, looking for exactly the right man as he had moved from one town to the next. He had had no other choice given the circumstances, and he could still remember the scene and the sense of relief and satisfaction when he had finally found the one he needed. He had driven across 3 states on his trip to Denver, across the Mississippi, and through the Badlands, then spent 3 weeks learning the man's routines. He had watched the real Richard Franklin as he watched Julie now. He had learned that Franklin was short and balding, obviously gay, and that he spent most of his time alone. Occasionally, Franklin worked late at his office, and one night he watched Franklin moving towards his car in a darkened parking lot, head down as he sorted through the keys. Franklin didn't hear him approach, and he placed the gun to Franklin's head. Do exactly what I say, he whispered, and I'll let you live. It had been a lie, of course, but the lie had served its purpose. Franklin had done everything that he had asked him to do and had answered all his questions. Franklin had gone to the ATM and had packed a suitcase. Franklin had even allowed him to be tied and blindfolded in the hope that his cooperation would be rewarded. He had driven Franklin to the mountains and told him to lie down on the side of the road. He remembered the begging and how Franklin's bladder had emptied in fear when he had heard the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. Mighty God, this man is pure devil. He had almost laughed at the man's weakness, his smallness, thinking how different they were. The man was nothing, a tiny, inconsequential nothing. Had he been in that situation, he would have fought or tried to get away. But Franklin began to cry, and 3 hours later, he was buried in a grave that would never be discovered. Without anyone pressing the search, he had known that Franklin's file would be buried in the pile of other missing persons and quickly forgotten. As long as Richard Franklin was missing, not dead, the identity had been easy to assume. Since then, he had he had trained himself not to answer to his real name or even to turn when he heard it from across the room. And when he spoke it now, it sounded foreign to him. He had taken care of the real Richard Franklin, but as he had taken care of his mother and father, and the boys in the foster home, and his roommate in college, and Jessica, his eyes narrowed. Now it was time to take care of Mike. Jesus, my God. See how devious this man is? Mabel was sitting with Andrea when her parents arrived from Boone. They had driven through their fears and tears for 6 hours, and Mabel left the room so they could be alone with their daughter. Moving to the waiting room, she thought about Mike and Julie, hoping they were safe. After seeing Andrea's wounds, when the doctors had changed their bandages, she knew with certainty that Richard Franklin was a monster and that Mike and Julie were in far more danger than they realized. Topsail wasn't far enough anyway, so they had to get as far away from Swansboro as they could and stay away as long as it took. She had to convince them somehow. Throughout the evening, the Swansboro Police Department was a hive of activity. After pounding the, after pounding the phones, they had come across 12 possible suspects who had checked into hotels. With the help of the Oslo County Sheriff's Department, they investigated their leads one by one without luck. J.D. Blanchard had a good photograph of the suspect, and Boris made copies before distributing them to the television stations. The report ran at the top of each news broadcast, making the public aware of the main suspect in the assault on Andrea Radley and letting them know that he was considered extremely armed and dangerous. A description of the car, complete with license plate number, was also listed in the report. As Morrison predicted, the calls flooded in within minutes of the airings. The entire department was on hand to answer them. Notes were jotted and names were taken. The crazies were weeded out. By 2 a.m., the department had talked to more than 200 people, but none had seen the suspect that day, nor did anyone spot the car. Exhausted, Richard thought of Jessica as he was finally trailing off to sleep. She had been a waitress at a restaurant he had gone to, and though she wasn't the one who had served him, his eyes had been drawn to her as he ate. She had seen him staring and smiled briefly, holding his gaze. He had gone back to the restaurant as it was closing and waited for her. It was as if she had been expecting him. The way the streetlights played on her features as they walked the late night streets of Boston. How she had stared at him across the table at dinner. The following weekend at Cape Cod, where they had strolled on the beach and had a picnic in the sand, or a picnic and a hot air balloon ride, Jessica and Julie, so much alike, his thoughts of them combining into one, images joining together. Julie, her tears as she watched Phantom of the Opera, the sensual touch of her fingers as she cut his hair, her empathy when he lied about his mother dying unexpectedly, how proud she seemed when she introduced him to her friends at the bar. God, he loved her. He would always love her. A moment later, his breaths were deep and steady. The following morning, a light mist hovered over the intercoastal waterway, burning off slowly as the sun rose above the treetops. A prism of light cut through the window of the police station, zeroing in on Jennifer's third cup of coffee for the morning. They were looking for a ghost, she thought. They had nothing, absolutely nothing to go on, and the wearing was the worst part. Jennifer had come into the office. Jennifer had come into the office after only a couple of hours' sleep, but she regretted the decision. There was nothing she could think of to do. The fingerprints hadn't helped, although Morrison had decided to use the FBI database as well. They were backlogged with cases from across the country, and he had been informed it could take at least a week to process. The calls were still coming in, of course, and she was answering the phone with regularity. The news had aired again early in the morning, and she scheduled to and was scheduled to run again at noon. But as with the night before, she wasn't getting the information she needed. Too many calls were coming in from frightened citizens who simply wanted to be reassured, or from others falsely claiming that the suspect was in their backyard. Most of the other officers had come in around the same time she had and were out investigating the claims. As the only officer still left at the station, she doubted whether any of them would pan out. But the officer had no choice but to follow up on all the leads. It was the downside to using the media for help, she thought. Though good information was possible, bad information was guaranteed, and it siphoned off the resources needed to do the job. Then again, what job? She wondered. The only thing they had to go on were the photographs from the briefcase, and she still couldn't figure out why she was so transfixed by them. She had gone through them a dozen times, but as soon as she put the stack aside, she felt the urge to reach for them again. Thumbing, th- thumbing through, she saw the same images: Jessica in the garden, Jessica on the patio, Jessica sitting, Jessica standing, Jessica smiling, Jessica looking serious. Jennifer set aside the photos in disgust. Nothing. A moment later, the phone rang. After listening, Jennifer began to respond. Yeah, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I'm sure it's safe for you to go to the hardware store. By the time Mabel left Wilmington, after staying awake most of the night, she was feeling slightly better than Andrea. Though she hadn't opened her eyes, there had been some movement in her hand just before dawn, and the doctors reiterated to her parents what a good sign that was. Knowing there was nothing else she could do, she got in the car and drove back to Swansboro. Okay, so it wasn't Andrea's car he stole. The morning sun made her eyes ache, and she had trouble. It wasn't Mabel's car he stole, and she had trouble staying focused on the road. Her worries about Mike and Julie's safety had only intensified during the night. I'll take a nap first, she told herself. Then I'll head on out to the beach to talk to them. Richard awoke and showered, then hopped back into the stolen Trans Am. 2 hours later, after buying a cup of coffee and a few magazines from a convenience store along the way, he pulled into Swansboro, feeling as if he had come home. He was dressed in dockers and a polo shirt, with his light hair and glasses. Even he didn't quite recognize himself when he peeked into the rearview mirror. He looked like any other family man heading to the beach for the weekend. Oh my God. He wondered what Julie was doing at that very moment, showering, eating breakfast. And was she thinking of him, even as he was thinking of her? He smiled as he dropped a series of quarters into two newspaper racks out front. While the Jacksonville newspaper was a daily, the Swansboro paper came out twice a week. After the convenience store, he made his way to a small park and perched on a bench near the swing set. Then, opening the newspaper, he didn't want his presence in the park to alarm anyone, especially the parents. People were paranoid these days about adults hanging around in the parks, but he supposed he understood that, even in a small town. His picture was on the front page of the paper, and he took his time in reading the article. It offered basic information, but not much else. He had no doubt the reporter had gathered the information directly from the police department and listed a hotline number for people to call if they had any information. When he finished reading it, he scanned the rest of the paper, looking for anything about the stolen car. Nothing. Then he settled in to read the article again, his eyes glancing up every few minutes. He would wait all day if he had to. He knew the one he was looking for, the one who would lead him to Julie and Mike. When Pete approached Jennifer's desk, she thought he looked as tired as she felt. Anything? She asked. He shook his head, stifling a yawn. Another false alarm. How about you? Not much. There was another waitress at the Mosquito Grove who remembered seeing Andrea and Richard together. We also heard from the hospital in Wilmington. Andrea's not out of the woods yet, but the doctors are hopeful. She passed. She paused. She paused. Yeah, Richard is a psychopath. He is. She paused. I forgot to ask this morning, but did you ever end up talking to the detective or Julie's mother? Not yet. Why didn't you give me the numbers while you grab some coffee? I'll check 'em out. Why? We already know why he went down there. I don't know what else to do. Jennifer finally spoke to Julie's mother, but Pete had been right for once. The call told the call told her nothing that she hadn't already assumed. Yes, the mother had said, a man who said he was an old friend of Julie's had come by. A week later, he had brought a friend with him. The friend had matched the description of the suspect. The call to the private investigator had gone unanswered again. Still no word on fingerprints. Without new information, she was back to where she had been before, and she was frustrated. Was he still in town? She didn't know. What would he do next? She didn't know. Was he still after Julie? She thought so, but wasn't absolutely sure. There was always the possibility that because the police were after him, he would simply leave town and start over, the way he had done in the past. The problem was that, for all intents and purposes, he had become Richard Franklin. There was nothing personal in the house whatsoever, with the exception of his clothing, his cameras, and the photographs. And the photographs told her nothing, except that he was a great photographer. They would have been taken anywhere, at any time, and and because Richard developed them, there wasn't so much as a lab they could trace back to them. Jennifer's thoughts suddenly froze as she felt the answer begin to click into place. Anywhere, at any time, good at photography, expensive camera gear, his own lab to develop them. This wasn't just a hobby for him, she thought. Okay, she already knew that. What else? She stared at the stack of photos on her desk. This is something. There is something he has been doing for a long time, years even, which meant he might have been using the cameras before he became the man known as Richard Franklin. Pete, she suddenly called out, are his cameras in the evidence room, or are they still with forensics? Franklin's? Yeah, we put them in yesterday. Jennifer jumped up from her chair and started towards the evidence room. Where are you going? I think I might know a way to find out who this guy is. A moment later, Pete was struggling to keep up with her. As she made her way through the station, what's going on? Pete demanded. Julie was signing out the, the photography gear at the counter as the officer in charge of the evidence locker watched her. The cameras, she said, the lenses. This stuff is expensive, right? And like you said, the pictures could have been taken anywhere and at any time, even with these cameras, right? He shrugged. I guess so. Don't you see what that means? she said. I mean, if he is bad, if he has had these cameras all along. No, I don't get it. What? By then, the officer had placed a Tupperware container on the counter and Julie reached for it. Too distracted to answer. Too distracted to answer, she picked it up and carried it back to her desk. A minute later, Pete Gandy watched in confusion as she studied the back of the camera. Do you have a small screwdriver? She said. What for? I need to remove this piece. Why? I'm I'm looking for the serial number. Why? He asked again. Jennifer was too busy looking through her drawers to answer. Damn, she said. They might have one in maintenance. Pete offered, still unsure why she needed the serial numbers. Duh. She gonna use the serial numbers to trace the camera, and then she will know who bought it. But I bet you she's gonna find that he bought it in the name Richard Franklin, so she's gonna be back at square one. I bet you. She looked up excitedly. You are a genius. I am? 15 minutes later, she had the list of serial numbers she needed. She gave half the numbers to Pete and took the other half to her desk, trying not to get her hopes up. She called information and got the numbers of the camera's manufacturers, then dialed the first one. After she explained that she needed to verify the name and address of the owner, the person on the other end typed in the number. It belongs to a Richard Franklin, what I told you. It belongs to a Richard Franklin. Jennifer hung up and tried the next one, then the next. On her fourth call, however, a different name was offered. The camera is registered to Robert Bonham of Boston, Massachusetts. Do you need the address? Jennifer's hands were shaking as she jotted down the information. Morrison looked it over. Oh my God. How certain are you that this is him? The name was listed on 4 different pieces of equipment, and according to their records, it had never been reported as stolen. I'm willing to bet this is our guy. What do you need from me? In case there's any problem with the Boston Police Department, I'd like you to get involved. Morrison nodded. Done. Jennifer didn't run into any problems. The first detective she reached was able to give her the information she needed. Robert Bonham is wanted for questioning in the disappearance of his wife, Jessica Bonham, 4 years ago, he said. I tell you, knowing that staying in one place would arouse suspicion, Richard grabbed his things and moved from one bench to another. He wondered what she was doing inside, but then again, it didn't really matter. He had learned long ago to be patient, and after glancing towards the windows, he raised the paper again. He had read every article 3 or 4 times, some more than that. He knew when and where motives were playing. He knew that the community center was offering free computer classes for seniors, but the paper shielded his face from curious townspeople. He wasn't worried about being discovered, though he knew they were looking for him. No one would think to look for him here. Even if anyone did, between the newspaper and his altered appearance, he was certain that no one would recognize him. His car was parked around the corner in a grocery store parking lot, and he could get to it easily if he had to. It was, he knew, only a matter of time now. An hour later, with pages still coming through the fax machine from the Boston from Boston regarding Jessica's disappearance, Jennifer sat at her desk, readying herself for the call she knew she had to make. After she had dialed, a female voice picked up on the other end. Hello? Is this Elaine Marshall? Yes. Who is this? This is Officer Jennifer Romanello. I'm calling from the Swansboro Police Department. Swansboro? It's a small town in North Carolina, Jennifer said. I was wondering if you had a moment to talk. I don't know anyone in North Carolina. I'm calling about your sister, Jessica, she said. There was a long silence on the other end. Have you found her yet? The voice was weak, as if expecting the worst. I'm sorry, but no, we haven't. But I was wondering if there is anything you could tell me about Robert Bonham. At the sound of his name, Jennifer heard Elaine Marshall draw a sharp breath. Why? Because right now we're looking for him. Because of Jessica? Jennifer wondered how much to say. No, she finally said. He is wanted in connection with something else. There was another long pause. He killed someone, didn't he? Elaine Marshall said automatically. In Swansboro. Jennifer hesitated. Is there anything you can tell me about him? He's insane. He's crazy, she said. Her words were clipped, as if she were doing her best to stay in control. Everyone was afraid of him, including Jessica. He's violent and dangerous, and he's smart. Jessica tried to get away from him once. He used to beat her. She went to the supermarket one night for groceries, and we never saw her again. Everyone knew he did it, but they never found her. Elaine Marshall began to cry. Oh God, it's been so hard. You can't imagine what it's like not to know. I mean, not to be certain. I know she's gone, but still, there's like a tiny spark that you hold on to. You try to move on, but then something happens that makes it all so real again. Jennifer listened to the sobbing on the other end. What was he like in the beginning of their relationship? She asked gently, after a moment. Why does that matter? He did whatever you think he did. He's evil. Please, Jennifer said. We just want to catch him. And you think he and you think this will help? It won't. We have been looking for him for years. We hired private investigators. We made sure the police stayed on the case. Elaine Marshall trailed off. He's there, Jennifer said, and we want to make sure he doesn't get away. Now, please, can you tell me what was he like? Elaine Marshall drew a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. Oh, just like you'd expect. It's an old story, isn't it? She didn't hide the sadness in her tone. He was charming and handsome, and pursued Jessica until she fell head over heels for him. He seemed nice at first, and we all liked him. They eloped after dating for 6 months, and after they were married, things changed. He got really possessive, and he didn't take it when Jessica called us. Pretty soon, she rarely left the house, but on the few occasions we did manage to see her, we saw bruises. Of course, we tried to talk some sense into her, but it took a long time before she listened to us. When you say that Jessica ran away once, what? She finally accepted that she had to. For a couple of days, he acted as if nothing happened. He tried to get us to tell him where she went, but of course, none of us would tell him anything. We knew what was going on with them, and we knew what was going on by then. She went to Kansas City, a place where she could start over, but he hunted her down. I had no idea how he did it, but he found her and brought her back, and she stayed with him for a couple of weeks. I can't explain it other than that. I can't explain it other than to say that he had this sort of power over her when they were together. I mean, her eyes were dead when you talked to her, like she knew she could never get away. But my mom and I were over to their house and finally dragged her out of there. She moved back in with her with our parents, and she was trying to get her life back together. She even seemed to be doing better after a while, and then one night she went to the supermarket and we never saw her again. After hanging up, Jennifer sat at the desk, thinking about the phone call, the words still ringing in her ears. He hunted her down. Ah, Arliss, I gotta find one of those gigs, huh? Oh Lord, sis, you never know. And you never know who is listening out there. You never know. So we're just gonna keep on doing what we're doing. And one day I guess somebody will discover us. AG, AG, what's up? How you been? I don't know why my back is hurting. The pain in my back. Not sure where it's from. Mabel got out of bed and showered. Despite her exhaustion, her worry about Mike and Julie had kept her from sleeping well. She had to talk to them in person, so they knew how serious this actually was. She grabbed her car keys and had headed out the door before she remembered that Julie had said in the salon right before she and Mike got into Emma's car, "What if he follows us?" Mabel froze in her driveway. What if Richard planned to follow her to the beach? What if he was watching her now? The street was clear in either direction, but Mabel wasn't so sure. Nor was she willing to take the chance. She turned around and headed back inside. After sorting through the information on on Robert Bonham and making a few more calls, including a second call to Elaine Marshall, Jennifer condensed the information into a couple of pages. She talked to Pete about what she wanted to do. Then together they were then together they were in to see Morrison. He looked up at Jennifer. He looked up as Jennifer slid the pages towards him and took a moment to peruse them. When he finished, he met her eyes. "You are sure about all this?" "I'm pretty sure. We still have some calls to make, but we have verified everything that you see." Morrison leaned back in his chair. He sat quietly for a moment, trying to absorb the seriousness of the situation. "What do you want to do?" Jennifer cleared her throat. "Until we find him, I think it's better if Pete stays out at the beach house with Mike and Julie. I don't know. Oh my God. I don't see that we have another choice. If what we learned is true, you know, you know what he's capable of doing and what he's likely to do next. Oh my God, remember he's planning to take out Mike." Morrison fixed her with a steady gaze. Do you think he's do you think they'll agree to something like that?" "Yes," Jennifer said. "I'm sure of it. Once they know that they're what they're up against, I mean." "Are you going to call them?" "No. I think it would be best if we talk to Julie in person." Morrison nodded. "If she agrees, I'll authorize it." A few minutes later, Jennifer and Pete got in the car. Neither one of them noticed the stolen Trans Am when it pulled into traffic behind them. Hmm, is he going to follow them to Julie? "His name is Robert Bonham," Jennifer began. "The real Richard Franklin has been missing for 3 years." "I don't understand," Julie said. They were in the kitchen of Henry's beach house. Mike and Julie sat at the table, Pete firmly settling into the position of the silent cop, leaned against the counter. Mike reached for Julie's hand and squeezed it. Jennifer knew she had to start at the beginning, since neither Mike nor Julie knew anything about the investigation. Going step by step would keep the questions to a minimum. It would also allow her to explain the gravity of the situation. How is that possible? Mike asked. The real Franklin The real Franklin wasn't married, and aside from his mother, who passed away in a nursing home last year, there was no one to notice if his social security number was back in use. And because he was considered missing, not deceased, there was nothing to raise an alarm. Mike stared at her. You think Robert Bonham killed him? It was more a statement than a question. Jennifer paused. Based on everything else we have learned about him, yes, it seems likely. Jesus! Julie looked out the window, suddenly feeling numb. OMG. On the beach, she saw an elderly couple stop in front of the house. The man, the man bent over and picked up a seashell, then put it in a plastic pail before moving on. So who is Richard Bonham? She said. And how do you know that's his real name? We know his name from the serial numbers on the cameras. He had registered them years ago. It was the only link to his past. But once we knew his name and where he was from, we were able to learn the rest fairly easily. Jennifer glanced at her notes. He was raised outside of Boston as an only child. His father was an alcoholic who worked at the chemical plant. His mother was a homemaker. There was more than one allegation of abuse in the home. The police had investigated half a dozen incidents over the years until his father passed away. After explaining the circumstances behind his father's death, Jennifer tapped the file. I talked to one of the officers in that case. He's retired now, but he remembered it very well. He said that nobody believed Vernon Bonham had committed suicide, but because they couldn't prove anything and knew Vernon wasn't exactly the model husband and father, they let it go. But he suspected the kid had closed the garage door and turned the engine back on after Vernon had passed out. As she listened, Julie felt her stomach doing flip flops. And the mother, she whispered, died of a drug overdose less than a year later. Again, it was ruled a suicide. Jennifer let the unspoken accusations hang for a moment before she went on. He spent the next few years in foster care, moving from one home to the next, never staying in one place for too long. His juvenile records are sealed, so we can't say what else he may have done in his teens. But in college, he was suspected in the assault and battery of his former roommate. The roommate had accused him of stealing money, and Robert denied it. A few months later, the roommate was beaten with a golf club after leaving his girlfriend's place and spent 3 weeks in the hospital. Though he accused Robert Bonham of it, there wasn't enough evidence to arrest him. A year later, Robert graduated with a degree in engineering. They let him stay in school? Mike asked. I'm not sure they had a choice, since nothing ever went to trial. She paused. After that, there's no record for a few years. Either he moved to another state or stayed out of trouble. We don't know yet. The next bit of information we have comes from 1994 when he married Jessica. What happened to her? Mike asked hesitantly, not sure if he wanted to know the answer. Jessica's been missing since 1998, Jennifer said. She was living with her parents, and the last time anyone saw her was at the supermarket. A witness remembered seeing Robert Bonham's car in the parking lot that night, but no one saw what happened to her. He vanished the same night she did. You mean he killed her? Mike asked. That's what her family and the police in Boston believe, Jennifer said. Mike and Julie leaned back in their seats, both of them pale with shock. The air seemed thick and stifling. I talked to Jessica's sister. Jennifer went on slowly, and that's part of the reason we are here. She told me that Jessica tried to run away once. She went halfway across the country, but somehow Robert tracked her down. Actually, she used the word hunted. She paused, letting the word sink in. I don't know if you're aware of it, but Robert Bonham, Richard, quit his job a month ago. In his house, we found pictures of you, hundreds of pictures. From what we can tell, he's been watching you pretty much around the clock since you first started dating. And he's also been checking up on your past. What do you mean? Julie asked raggedly. The week he said he was with his dying mother, he went to Daytona. He went there to learn more about you. The private investigator was checking into your history. He talked to your mother about it. It seems pretty clear that he had been stalking you all along. Like a hunter, Julie thought, her throat constricting. Why me? Why me? She finally said, why did he choose me? The words came out plaintively, like those of a child on the verge of tears. I don't know with any certainty, Jennifer says, but let me show you what else we found. More? What now? From the file, Jennifer slid a photograph across the table, the one she had found on the bedstand. Mike and Julie looked at it, then slowly raised their eyes again. OMG. I don't know if I want to finish reading it tonight. Uncanny, isn't it? This is Jessica. Here, I wanted you to see this too. Though it made her feel as if bugs were crawling under her skin, Julie glanced at the photo again, and this time she saw what Jennifer was pointing to. Hanging from the young woman's neck was the locket that Richard, Robert, whoever, had given to Julie. She heard herself whisper hi- she heard herself whisper her name, Jessica Bonham. She said, JB. Oh, remember JB is in the locket and Julie's name is Julie Barronson. So that is why he picked Julie to give Julie that locket because the signature matches. OMG. Behind her, Julie heard Mike inhale sharply. I know this is hard, Jennifer went on, but there's another reason we wanted to talk to you. Because of Andre and what we believe happened with Jessica, as well as the real Richard Franklin, we'd like to have Officer Gandhi stay with you two for a few days. Here at the house? Mike asked. If that's okay. Julie's eyes were almost glassy as Mike glanced towards Pete. Yeah, he said. I think that's a great idea. Pete went out of the car and was retrieving the suitcase he had packed when he saw Jennifer scanning the homes along the beach. It is always so quiet here. I guess so, Pete answered. She studied the homes again. Only a few had cars parked in the driveways. The usual SUVs and Camrys, and a Trans Am as well. Something a teenager might drive. The cars she herself had wanted in high school. 6 cars together, but that still meant that less than a quarter of the homes were occupied. She wasn't quite comfortable with that, but no doubt it was better than staying in town. And you will stay awake all night? She asked Pete. Yeah, he said, slamming the trunk. I'll catch a few hours of sleep in the morning. You'll keep me up to speed on what's going on, right? As soon as I find out anything, I'll give you a call. He nodded. Then, after a pause, he said, Listen, I know this is something we have to do, but do you really think he's still around? Or do you think he's on the run again? Honestly, yeah, I think he's around. Pete's eyes followed hers up and down the street. So do I. That night, Julie couldn't sleep. Outside, she could hear the sound of the waves as they lapped along the shore in steady rhythm. Mike was in bed beside her and had opened the window slightly as soon as he had fallen asleep. Julie had risen from the bed and closed it, making sure the latch was engaged. From beneath the door, she could see a light glowing from the kitchen. Pete had been pacing the house earlier, but he seemed to have settled down in the past couple of hours. Despite his earlier actions, she was glad he was there. Not only was he strong, more importantly, he carried a gun. From the dune, Richard watched the yellow light glowing in the window of the beach house. He was annoyed that Officer Gandhi had decided to stay with them, but he knew the police couldn't stop him, nor could Mike or Singer. He and Julie were meant for each other, and he would simply overcome any obstacles, oh my God, to their ultimate happiness. Everything else was an inconvenience, no more challenging than changing his appearance or stealing a car or having to start over again. He wondered where they would end up after leaving North Carolina. He could imagine Julie enjoying San Francisco with its sidewalk vistas and views of the Pacific, or New York City, where they could enjoy new theater productions every season, or even Chicago with its spirit and vibrancy. It would be wonderful, he thought, magical. Sleep well, he thought with a smile. Sleep and dream of a new future, because tomorrow night it begins. Lord of mercy, God. What is wrong with this man? What is wrong with him? He's a very sick person. Very, very sick. Tag, what's up? He is very sick, I tell you. There was a languid feel to the night air the following evening. The breeze was steady, and the blackness of the sky was softened by cloud cover. The ocean was calm, swells rising gently. The smell, the smell of brine hung in the air like mist. They had finished dinner an hour early, and Singer was standing near the back door, his tail wagging slightly. Julie crossed the room and opened the door for him, watching as he descended the steps and vanished into the shadows a moment later. She didn't like letting him out. Despite Mike's and Pete's presence, she felt safer when Singer was beside her. But he needed to roam, and night was the best time. She didn't mind letting him out early in the morning when no one was out, but during the day, there were too many people around to let him wander without a leash. She had thought about going outside as well, with Pete and Mike, of course, thinking, huh, thinking a bit of fresh air would do her some good. But then she had decided against it. No doubt Mike and Pete would have said no, even if she had insisted. Still, it would have been nice. In theory, anyway. Both Emma and Mabel had called her. Henry had called back later to talk to Mike. None of the phone calls had lasted more than a few minutes. None of them, it seemed, had anything much to say, except for Mabel, who had called after speaking with Andrea's parents. Late last night, Andrea had emerged from her coma and thought she was still disoriented. It appeared she was going to be okay. Jennifer was planning to talk to her in a couple of days. Jennifer Romanello had also called twice with updates. She had finally been able to find the private investigator who had been snooping into Julie's past. And after the usual grousing that he wouldn't that he couldn't that he couldn't ethically divulge who had hired him, he had knuckled under. He was offered a phone that confirmed a couple of calls to Richard's residence. Unfortunately, they still hadn't found any trace of Robert, whoever he was. Julie turned from the door and walked through the living room into the kitchen, where Mike was slipping dishes into the sink. Pete was still at the table, playing solitaire. He had he had played about 100 games since noon, killing them, and for the most part, staying out of the way, except when he went outside to check on things. Perimeter is secure. Oh my God. Perimeter secure had become his new favorite catchphrase. Julie slipped her arms around Mike, and he turned his head at her touch. Almost done, he said. Just a few more to wash. Where's Singer? Julie grabbed a towel and started to dry the dishes. I let him out. Again? He's not used to being cooped up like this. You're still thinking about what Jennifer told you, aren't you? Thinking about that, thinking about this, thinking about everything. What we did in the past, what he did to Andrea. Where is he now? Why me? Whenever I heard about stalkers, Whenever I heard about stalkers, there always seemed to be some twisted sort of logic to it, like people who chase movie stars or ex-husbands or boyfriends. But we only went out a couple of times, and we barely knew each other. So I kept thinking back and trying to figure out if it was something that I did that caused all of this. He's just crazy, freaking crazy, Mike said. I don't I don't know that he'll ever understand it. From his vantage point near the dune, Richard watched Julie open the door and let Singer out. With the light glowing from behind her, she appeared like a descending angel. Richard found himself, Lord, this man is crazy. God, what's up? Good to see you. Richard found himself growing aroused by the thought of what was going to happen next. Yesterday, after he had located them, he had pulled his cats. He had pulled his car into the driveway of a home that was plastered with reality signs. Jesus of mercy. Though many of the homes along the beach were still vacant this time of year, this one looked as if it had been unoccupied for a while. A quick check revealed an alarm system for the house, but not for the garage. And he had worked his way through the simple lock with a screwdriver he had found in the glove compartment of the Trans Am. From the trunk, he had removed the tire iron. He had slept on a dusty air mattress he had found on the shelves, and in the storage area he had found a small cooler. Though it had grown moldy, it suited his purpose, and he had spent an hour that afternoon purchasing what he needed. Now, all he had to do was wait until Singer wandered down the beach. He knew Julie would let him out, as she had done last night, and, and most probably the night before. People under stress always fell back into routine and habits, as if hoping to maintain some semblance of order in their world. In the distance, he could no longer see Singer. Beside him were the four hamburgers he had picked up from the island deli, a place he had found near the hardware store he had visited that afternoon. What if he going to poison Singer? They were still wrapped in foil, but he had already unwrapped them once and crumbled the patties into pieces. Taking the hamburger with him, he began crawling through the grass towards the back steps of the home. I hate this damn game, Pete said. It's impossible to win. As Julie slipped, oh my God, as Julie slipped the plates into the cupboard, she glanced towards the table. Put the red 7 on the black 8. Pete Gandy blinked, still trying to see it. Where? The final column. Oh, yeah, there it is. Lost in the game again, Pete kept his eyes focused downwards. Mike washed the last dish and pulled the plug from the drain, then looked up at the window. With the kitchen light playing against the glass, all he could see was his own reflection. Oh my God, guys. Outside, Richard unwrapped the foil and scattered the crumbled beef onto the steps that led over the dune and back to the house. He knew Singer would get there before Julie and Mike, so he wasn't worried about them spotting it. He wasn't sure how much Singer weighed, so he had mixed in as much of the bitter powder as he thought he could, while preserving the aroma of the beef. He didn't want Singer to sniff it a couple of times, sense that it wasn't what it appeared to be, then ignored it. No, that wouldn't be any good at all. Singer had already bitten him once, and he didn't want to face those teeth again. Julie had stopped Singer the first time, but he was under no illusions that she would stop him again. More than that, there was something about the dog that bothered him, something he couldn't quite put his finger on, something not dog-like, for lack of a better word. All he knew was that as long as the dog was around, Julie would remain confused and resistant. He crept towards his hiding place again and settled in to wait. Mike and Julie were sitting on the couch in the living room, watching as Pete Gandy continued to lose one game after another. Did I ever tell you about the letter that I got from Jim? Julie asked. The one on Christmas Eve, after he died? She sounded as if she were making a confession. A shadow crossed her face, and Mike could tell she wasn't sure about what she wanted to say. You have mentioned it, but I don't know what it said. Julie nodded before leaning against him, feeling his arm slip over her shoulder. You don't have to tell me about it if you'd rather not, Mike offered. I think you should know, she said. In a way, I think it was about you and me. Mike remained silent, waiting for her to go on. For a moment, she stared into the kitchen. Then her eyes met his. Her voice was soft. The letter was mainly about Singer. Why he got me a Great Dane, that he didn't want me to be alone, and how since he knew I didn't have any family, he thought that a dog would help me. He was right about that, but at the end of his letter, he said that he wanted me to be happy again. He told me to find someone who makes me happy. She paused, a wistful smile on her face, her, her first in what seemed like forever. That's why I think it was about you and me. I know you love me, and I love you too. And you make me happy, Mike. Even with all the horrible stuff going on, you have still made me happy. I just wanted you to know that. The words sounded strangely out of place. He didn't know why she had felt the urge to bring it up now. It almost seems as if she were trying to find a nice way to say goodbye. Mike pulled her closer to him. You've made me happy too, Julie, he said. And you are right. I do love you. Julie put a hand on his leg. I'm not saying all this because I want to end things with you. Not at all. I'm saying it because I don't know how I would have handled the last few weeks without you. And because I'm sorry that I dragged you into all of this, there's nothing to be sorry for, dear. Sure, there is. You were always the one who was right for me. And somehow, I think that Jim was trying to tell me that in his letter. But for a long time, I was too blind to see. If I had listened to him, there never would have been a Richard. And I want you to know I'm thankful now. Only I'm thankful now, not only that you put up with all that, but that you are here for me now. I didn't have a choice, he murmured. We're not going to finish reading this book tonight, you know, people. Trust me, we are going to continue the reading. Tomorrow, we will continue the reading tomorrow, guys. Boy, this book is so intense. And you know, when I start reading a book that is this intense, I do not want to stop, but I have to stop. I have to stop tonight. Oh my God. So that tomorrow, so that tomorrow morning, I can finish reading the rest of it. Guys, I tell you, that Richard, whatever his name is a real devil. He is a real devil, I tell you. Look at all that the man is going through just to stalk a woman, plotting, planning. All that time, he could be finding something suitable to do with his life. Instead, he is standing there stalking this woman and plotting and plotting to remove everybody she knows out of the way so he can run away with her. Oh my God, this man is crazy. But you know, guys, it is bringing us to a sad reality that there are crazy people like that out there. You hear of people complaining of being stalked, and the next thing you know, they disappeared. Look what he did to Jessica. He stalked her, and then he made her disappear. And we know what happened to her. Look at the man whose identity he stole. He stalked the man for 3 full years, and then the man disappeared. The man had no family, no wife, no children, only him and his mother. So there's really nobody to look out for him, to press the police, to search for him, to see what happened to him. So he slew the man and starts to assume the man's identity. He's a real piece of work, I tell you. But there was something funny about it from the moment, from the time Julie went out with him. First, I thought he was a nice guy, but that's how the story is made, to make your thoughts go back and forth. So that's it for the reading for tonight, my dears. I want to say thanks to everybody who came into the live. I sincerely appreciate you all. And I've noticed that whenever I do the reading live, more people come in. I think a lot of people come in and listen, but they don't say a word. Yeah, they come in and listen, but they don't say a word. And I sincerely appreciate them. But when I read it and leave it, only a few people go back and listen to it. So y'all know I'm studying y'all's patterns just as much as y'all are studying mine. So So that is where we are going to end the reading for tonight, my friends. I want to say thanks to everybody who came in, everybody who listened. I hope you all are enjoying the story as much as I'm enjoying bringing it to you. And that's it for tonight, my friends. Until next time, this is Trev from Trevessence, where your journey matters. Have yourselves a great night, guys. Good night, Sister Arely and Cad and Joseph and AG and Albert and Andrea and Angie and everybody else who is here. Have yourselves a great night, guys.